Bonus episode 54.5, Scurvy. What it is, how to cure it, and why modern society keeps bringing it back. Hello, and welcome to this bonus episode of the history of American food. This time, I'll be doing an explainer of scurvy and, possibly more importantly, doing an inventory of the mental luggage that made scurvy so mysterious then, and allows it to do comeback tours even now. To see how this two-paragraph biology class topic is related to food, technology, and war, put on your safety goggles, pull up to your place at the lab table, and no eating, or you might turn into a dinosaur. The first thing you need to know about scurvy is that it is a disease of the modern world. Without food storage technology, there is no scurvy. Without food storage, there's more starvation and all that, and this is one of those things that the raw foodists love to clang on about. But there has to be a happy medium, folks. Dependable food is important, but so is food that can only happen here and now. And it can even be little, just that flower box of chives or nasturtiums or whatever grows in your area. So nibble on that purslane and let's learn about the sea rot. Scurvy is a disease of deficiency, and it's our own evolutionary fault. In all the world of living things, both plant and animal, only we humans and just a few other mammal species have this problem with vitamin C or ascorbic acid. Just about every living thing, whether plant or animal, can make all the vitamin C it needs. And only we, a few other primates, and guinea pigs can't. Okay, and a few other things, but that's not important now. This teeny-weeny, on a biomolecular scale, organic acid is essential for multiple bodily functions. Oh no, I'm going to have to do a whole thing on vitamins. Okay, note to self, that's for another show. Don't get too hung up on the history of vitamins right now. Save that for the 19th century, post-Civil War, where they belong. In animals, vitamin C is required for collagen formation, which is an essential connective bodily tissue in things like skin and muscle. It also plays a role in tissue repair and is needed for the manufacture of neurotransmitters, nerve chemicals, if you will. It also plays a role in immune function and overall is just one of those little molecules I've always thought of as biochemical washers. You know, those little flat metal, plastic, and rubber things used with screws and bolts and the like in mechanical parts. They don't seem so important as you're installing them, but when they aren't where they are needed, these little 2-cent parts can bring the whole works down. And also like washers, you can get along quite well without them for a while before things start to go absolutely pear-shaped. Also like washers, if you stop the works as soon as you see a problem and install them before anything important breaks, everything is just fine. And the last thing vitamin C has in common with washers, they are small. And they wear out after a while, so they need regular replenishing. As a small organic acid, vitamin C can be altered by exposure to basic solutions, light or heat, chemically active metals, and can be combined with other substances, or taken apart and made into other things. It's not terribly hard to manufacture, unless, of course, you can't, but it's also not that sturdy. As a biomechanical chemical, vitamin C is so essential for the functioning of life that most every living thing manufactures it for itself. That is why, all citrus hype aside, it is almost impossible to find a fresh food that does not contain vitamin C, which means that all those pre-agricultural humans who, according to lots of archaeology, were eating an astounding number and volume of plants, when the mutation happened that removed the self-making vitamin C capability from them, there was no particular problem. Even when humankind settled down a bit to tend some seasonal fields of grains of some sort, the ongoing consumption of all sorts of plant life meant they were getting plenty of vitamin C to keep scurvy off the list of common complaints. And humans are actually pretty good at hanging on to and storing vitamin C. So there must have been periods of time when vitamin C was scarce. Our bodies only excrete it when there is a sufficiency. Our kidneys will stop it from leaving the blood when we are low. And that, incidentally, answers the question of why, say, people who lived in the Arctic and ate only fish, seal, and polar bear meat for extended periods of time did not widely suffer from scurvy. The livers of seal, bear, and fish, consumed raw or only lightly cooked, contain adequate vitamin C supplies, as do fish eggs. When supplemented with the summer plant foods that Arctic people gathered, scurvy would be kept at bay. Overall, plants are reliably better sources of vitamin C on a pound-for-pound basis than meat. Yes, citrus, and I'll get into why they were favored aboard ship in a bit, but all the brassicas, cabbage, and I mean all the cabbages, broccoli, mustard greens, kale, radishes, including horse, red, and daikon, turnips, rutabaga, kohlrabi. Okay, I'll stop. Anyway, all the brassicas are incredibly great sources of vitamin C, but so are sweet and white potatoes, just about every tropical fruit, apples, and stone fruits. Anyway, the consumption of a variety of plant material will keep a human stocked with plenty of vitamin C, even if they are only getting vitamin C containing foods every few weeks. The key to getting vitamin C from food is that it is fresh, or at least not long cooked. So steamed, sautéed, and sun-dried things retain quite a bit of vitamin C, but not things that have been long boiled. Hence my need to remind everyone that England could have solved its scurvy problem by sending their sailors to sea with prunes, or as they're now mainly known in the US as dried plums. The British mainly didn't do this because such lowly jack tars and sea dogs didn't deserve luxuries such as sweeties like those. In fact, fresh food of any sort was rarely provided to the British military enlisted men because its procurement and distribution was expensive and required more logistics. And probably most importantly, the victualling contracts would have been filled by a larger number of small suppliers, so couldn't have been the high-dollar patronage boondoggles they were. But let's get to just what scurvy was like for the poor souls suffering from it. No two people suffer the effects of scurvy in exactly the same way, nor in the same order or with the same severity, which is part of what pinning it down made it such a puzzle. But scurvy can be broken down into earlier and later stages. The earliest symptom is lethargy, partly to do with the problems in neurotransmitters and partly due to a nutrient just being in short supply, so the body has to work harder to keep functioning. Because vitamin C is involved in connective tissue, the next thing that happens is easier bruising. Capillaries, those tiniest of blood vessels, become very thin and get leaky. Skin also becomes softer and more subject to cuts and will even tear from abrasions. And all the wounds will take longer to heal until the ability to heal is lost entirely and wounds remain open and weepy. The breaking down of connective tissue is what leads to the swollen gums and then the loose teeth also associated with scurvy. Dark or black spots appear on limbs, which are actually small hemorrhages forming because blood vessels are failing. Joints swell and the tissues around them also blacken as the bending of joints squishes and breaks more blood vessels. Each of these symptoms is accompanied by a great deal of pain. Death usually comes when enough blood vessels have failed to cause a massive hemorrhage that leads to heart failure, unless, of course, a massive infection from earlier wounds hadn't already done you in. To paraphrase Bart Simpson, in conclusion, scurvy is an extremely gross disease. To make things even more confusing for medical brains awash in humorism and morality-based theories of disease, ordinary sailors tended to suffer from scurvy at much higher rates and much sooner during journeys than the officers. This definitely led many a surgeon and social philosopher to conclude that there had to be a moral element to scurvy. Those of the better classes with better pedigrees and from their vantage point, those with obviously stronger moral fiber were less subject to the sea rot. What most of them did not take into account was that the officer class were being fed a better and more varied diet at home that regularly included fruits, vegetables, and fresh meat. Poor city people and convicts often ate a restricted diet of grain porridges, long-boiled peas and vegetable stews, and limited or no fresh meat. The city poor of England's 18th century rarely ate meat in any form other than drippings or gravy, or smoked or salted fish, or salted meat. This set of circumstances meant that the officer class started off with a better store of vitamin C before they even came on board, and better health generally. To exacerbate the situation, officers from the greenest ensign all the way up to captain were allowed to bring on board personal stores. While alcohol, especially wines and brandies, were favorite items, dried and syrup-preserved fruits and jams were almost always packed on board. The sweet fruits were important to the sailors for breaking up the boredom of shipboard fare. What nobody knew is that they also trickled in a little vitamin C to keep stores at reasonable levels. In the early days of the age of exploration, time out at sea without significant land time was topping out at 2 to 4 months. Because of the limitations of ships and a generally limited trust in charts and navigation, the expectation was that boats would spend most of their time along coasts, and there would be plenty of time ashore to find company, eat better food, consume stupefying drink, and generally get back into sailing and fighting shape, or something like it. Through the early 17th century, there were a few voyages that went for longer stretches than a few months. The exceptions were often those early trips around Africa by the Portuguese. Everybody wave at Prince Henry the Navigator. His ghost is still with us. And scurvy did appear. But it was stopped in its tracks as fresh food was acquired upon landfall. But as sailing became a weapon of war, and longer patrols watching for enemies, Spanish treasure galleons and pirates or blockading harbors became the norm. Terms on board without significant land breaks started to tip into years. And if all you are provided with is salt meat and salt fish, dried peas, rock-hard ship's biscuits, often with weevil surprises, dodgy and often rancid butter and cheese as the center of the diet, with beer and greenish water to wash it down, this was a wasteland for vitamin C and other, let's face it, important nutrients. The diet could be supplemented with fish, birds, and turtles caught by the sailors as well, along with the occasional barbecued rat if things were really horrid. The sad truth is, while the weevils, which are flower beetle larvae, did not contain much vitamin C, those ship rats did. In fact, there are a few little strange papers speculating that the sailors that ate shipboard rats did slightly better in these scurvy survivor games than did the ones who refused. And not just because they had a source of more calories, but because the little vermin were a source of at least a bit of vitamin C. Sadly, what they didn't know was that if they had made sauces of the livers of the birds, fish, turtles, and rats caught at sea, they would have had access to yet more vitamin C. I was reminded of that while watching some original Iron Chef. By the way, they almost always served various fish, meat, and shellfish dishes along with a sauce made of the animal's liver. Now, there's a whole river delta of distraction out there to get lost in, considering cultures that insist on varied diets through tradition versus cultures that strive for streamlined foods, but I digress. English sailors had no taste for liver sauces, nor the kitchen access to prepare such fussy things, should they have been interested. Instead, they suffered from scurvy and left the Admiralty in a pickle. Individual surgeons were sending letters of concern regarding the suffering of the men, and worse yet, the climbing mortality of the crews, regularly reaching 50% as longer at-sea terms became the norm. While the suffering of the men might have been bad for morale, what really got the Admiralty was the ongoing need to find replacement men. Impressment or kidnapping one's crew off the streets was a time-consuming and frustratingly expensive process, but the practice continued since it was a handy way to empty prisons and sweep the streets clean of vagrants or, just young men in general. Sure, business owners might have complained that their apprentices and assistants were simply disappearing in the dead of night, but they didn't have the political pull of those running the prisons, who were, incidentally, making money repeatedly selling off the prisoners to merchant captains and, on occasion, the Admiralty. Between the late 15th century voyages across the Atlantic and around Africa to the mid-19th century, when steam engines came into use, it is estimated that around 2 million sailors died of scurvy, more than, quote, storms, shipwrecks, and combat combined, unquote, according to Catherine Price in an article from 2017. And that was a loss rate of sailors that could not be kept up indefinitely, especially as the number of ports the British sought to both defend and blockade continued to increase. So it was for that reason, a finite and dwindling supply of sailors, that the problem of scurvy finally became an issue that needed to be solved. I mean, the War of 1812 between the British and the Americans will be as much about the British running out of guys to sail their boats as anything else. Different captains and sailors kept making the connection that fresh food, especially raw leafy vegetables and fruits, kept the scurvy away, and even cleared it up when it wasn't so advanced as to be fatal. By the 17th century, it was pretty well known among seafaring populations that citrus fruits, bitter oranges and lemons in particular, seemed to work especially well. And bonus, unlike European fruits, the oil-rich, thick skins of the citrus fruits resisted rot for a long time, so they could be kept on board ships. So just about every island the Spanish and the Portuguese frequently visited was planted with orange and sometimes lemon trees. Ship captains, merchant and naval, who sought to keep consistent crews on their ships would attempt to stock up on oranges when they could. As for the English, when orders said to keep at the seas, to blockade this port or that channel, or to stay on patrol for a certain period of time, with only time to resupply with ship stores and no time or budget to stock up with fresh food, better judgment was overruled by orders. And extended shore leave to let sailors get refueled with fresh food was definitely discouraged when so many of the sailors had been pressed into service and might, decide to escape. So if just letting sailors go ashore and eat fresh food was not an option, and fresh foods were fussy to keep on board and fancy citrus fruits were expensive, what other options were there? Well, for starters, oranges and lemons, along with apparently having an effect on scurvy, were also sour. So attention turned to other sour preserved foods, and better yet, thoughts focused on even cheaper and more stable sour chemical elixirs. One food of particular interest was sauerkraut or pickled cabbage, and another was apple vinegar. Both were important parts of winter foods as they kept well in storage barrels. The combination of their sourness and barrel stableness made them particularly attractive to those in the ship's stores business. But there's a twist here. With the sauerkraut, if you remember back to the pickle episodes in the 17th century, I spent some time differentiating lactobacilli self-fermented pickles versus cooked and vinegar-soaked pickles. For a variety of reasons, English cooks tended to prefer the boiled vegetables submerged in a salty vinegar brine, and those procuring ship stores did as well, because these are stable once they're made and can sit in barrels in a storehouse somewhere, waiting to go out to sea. But that boiling treatment, which made the pickles stable, also destroyed the vitamin C in the vegetables, making them useless as an anti-scorbutic. On the other hand, lacto-fermented pickles, because they happen at cool cellar temperatures, keep a fair amount of the vegetable's vitamin C intact. Traditional salt-rubbed cabbage that ferments into sauerkraut or kimchi or the like are living colony critters in need of tending. They give off carbon dioxide, so they can't be sealed up tight for indefinite periods, or they'll explode. Lacto-fermented pickles need to breathe and need to be defended from grubby hands carrying their own bacterial colonies. Otherwise, after a time, the pickle will start growing unfriendly bacteria that causes the mixture to turn from a pickle into a rot. More than one European sea captain correctly recognized fermented vegetables as useful anti-scorbutics, including the storied Captain James Cook. Among other things, Cook led voyages that mapped significant chunks of the northwest coast of North America, the Hawaiian Islands, though he dubbed them the Sandwich after one of his major patrons, and tripped over a number of the South Pacific volcanic islands as well as New Zealand and the east coast of Australia. However, not understanding the important differences between the fermented pickles and the cooked pickles led him to experience disappointing results from some of the sauerkraut he packed for his voyages. By using the cooked and the self-fermented ones interchangeably, he came to the conclusion that all pickled cabbage was ineffective against scurvy and decided that freshly brewed beer was a better bet. Another attempt at stable anti-scorbutic was apple vinegar. This actually had some positive effect initially since they were using unfiltered vinegar that included the mother, or that bacterial mat that grows in naturally fermented vinegar. But as the barrels remain on board sealed up and subject to long periods of overly hot or cold weather, the mother would perish. The residual vitamin C would be destroyed and the vinegar would lose its anti-scorbutic powers. Always on the hunt for a solution that was yet more stable and supported the increasingly fashionable idea of better living through chemistry, a dose of dilute elixir of vitriol was also used as a possible cure. What, you may ask, is elixir of vitriol? It sounds uninviting. Well, it's sulfuric acid, of course. At this point in science land, understanding that chemicals were made up of atoms alone or in combinations of molecules was just starting to be figured out way out of the fringes. What held the attention of the mainstream, frequently published and in-crowd scientists and natural philosophers was the flow of heat in or out and the sometimes consumption or expulsion of gases. Elixir of vitriol was seen to do all sorts of miraculous things, including generating heat when applied to neutral-looking materials, eliciting gas bubbles, and keeping its virtue or powers, even when stored for long periods. But its main attraction was that a dilute solution was sour, so should work as an anti-scorbutic. It would chase away the scurvy with its heat-generating nature and gas-expelling properties. It just needed to be given in a dilute enough solution so that it didn't kill or maim the unlucky recipient. Note from an ex-chemistry teacher here. While some elixirs and even soft drinks have contained small amounts of sulfuric acid over the years, please do not go around hunting for or drinking solutions of this. Even the vapor can cause skin and mucous membrane irritation, as well as temporary or permanent blindness. The warning label on sulfuric acid is one of those that shows it causing dents in the human body by dripping on it. For reference, there are several popular soft drinks that do currently contain acid to give them part of their bite, but they purposefully use phosphoric acid because it is much less dangerous in its concentrated form. Don't drink sulfuric acid. I'm begging you. Needless to say, despite being exciting, cool, and rather dangerous, the sour flavor of dilute elixir of vitriol did nothing to cure scurvy. In fact, James Lind, the 18th century naval surgeon, generally given credit for, quote, discovering, unquote, the cure for scurvy, was so enamored of the elixir of vitriol that when he conducted his later famous experiment of dosing sailors suffering from scurvy with either a daily quart of apple vinegar, a daily orange or lemon, or a few drops of the vitriol, when the oranges and lemons guys got better and he ran out of the fruits, he switched them to the drops of vitriol. The irony, of course, is that the vitriol-only patients never got any better, while the apple vinegar patients did improve a little. But Lind was so stuck in his humorism-based understanding of scurvy that he buried the lead regarding the effect of the citrus fruits. He did this so thoroughly, his study was not dug up for decades, and then his discovery was retconned back onto him. Lind himself never particularly felt he had discovered a cure. Instead, he wrote pages explaining away the effects of the citrus fruits and talking himself out of their importance, which is why it wasn't until the opening of the 19th century that a daily ration of lemon juice became part of the British naval routine. And it didn't go smoothly. Fruits can go bad, even those rot-resistant citrus, especially when they're flowing through the twisty and corrupt naval procurement system. I mean, Patrick O'Brian's Jack Aubrey naval adventure novels bang on about this quite a bit. And the hiccups weren't just due to rotting citrus. There were also a few too clever tries at streamlining lemon juice and later lime juice delivery that messed up the vitamin C. One false start involved squeezing the juice from the fruit and then boiling it thoroughly to sterilize it for long storage. Adding heat was often determined as a method for increasing the power of humorism-based cures. So it was thought that boiling the juice could possibly make the juice itself more powerful. But of course, the boiling simply destroyed the vitamin C and returned scurvy to boat decks. A second hiccup came in the form of copper tubing. Juice would be stored in closed tanks, fresh this time, not boiled. Lessons had been learned, but the juice would be dispensed using copper tubing, which would react with the vitamin C and render it inactive. Again, bringing scurvy back to the British Navy, which, incidentally, is why, if you are planning on getting your vitamin C from that Moscow Mule, a vodka, ginger beer, and lime cocktail traditionally served in a copper mug, you are out of luck. Okay, also the amount of lime juice in there wasn't going to help you out all that much. The copper tubing problem was later solved, but laid the foundation for lead piping and tanks in British shipping that would end up visiting lead poisoning on different crews later in the 19th century. Sigh. If it's not one thing, it's another. Anyway, the long-standing solution for the British Navy became what is available today as Rose's lime juice, a syrupy lime juice that is shelf-stable, palatable, and a good source of vitamin C. The lesson of humans needing fresh foods and a varied diet would be learned and forgotten over and over and over again. Land scurvy struck English colonists in North America and Australia, as people were unwilling to eat anything but the preserved rations from back home. As canned, dehydrated, and extracts of food became a good way to preserve the calories and flavors of food, though stripped of their more fragile nutrients, scurvy would reappear on scientific expeditions, at colonial outposts, and repeatedly among people in mining camps, whether it was for opals, gold, silver, diamonds, or oil. It was not until 1912 that vitamin C was identified as a specific substance, and it happened rather by accident, because an experimentation on deprivation was being done on guinea pigs, one of the few other mammals that cannot produce its own vitamin C. I mean, all they do all day is wander around eating raw vegetation, so normally guinea pigs, why would they ever have to worry about vitamin C? Clearly, the answer is if they are included in a grain-based deprivation study. That's when it would get them. Vitamin C was finally synthesized in 1933 and became an additive in all sorts of packaged foods, especially when it was discovered that ascorbic acid worked as a food preservative. As a result, 1 million shelf-stable food products can now proudly state, quote, no artificial additives or preservatives, because yes, vitamin C, or ascorbic acid, is indeed a naturally occurring chemical, even if it doesn't naturally occur in the given food. And all things considered, as preservatives go, it does far more good than harm. It's certainly more useful than simply using massive amounts of sugar or salt as a preservative. The downside is that diets that lean heavily on shelf-stable foods, those that don't need refrigeration to remain sound and edible, are often deficient in vitamin C. The foods we make most readily available to our populations with the least time and least access to food options in healthcare are very much like their counterparts in the old school ship stores that provided calories but only limited nutrients to the sailors. Once again, this is largely because they are cheap to produce and store practically indefinitely. In our current culture, whether foods adequately feed the people they are aimed at isn't really considered. Which means that once again, much like in the slums of 18th century London and the shores of the early Australian colonies, we are again seeing scurvy among some populations. In the 21st century, here we are again, inflicting diets of deficiency on our own citizens, particularly the ones we have determined then, as now, to be the undeserving poor. So that's it for scurvy. It will pop back up in the regular feed as we do things like cover the introduction of limes to America. But I'll be back with more bonus episodes that cover some of the other diseases of deficiency that we have visited upon ourselves. I hope I can help people understand that yes, there are some diseases that are very directly related to our diets and what we can do about it. For now, eat a varied diet, eat your vegetables, fresh, frozen, or cooked, and enjoy your favorite fruits. Thanks for listening. Show notes for this episode will be at thehistoryofamericanfood.blogspot.com. Along with promised pictures and links, I'll also include any interesting media I consumed for the episode. Shout out, as always, to the Dinosaur Neil episode of The Tick. No unnecessary innovations, my foot. Any email questions or quibbles will reach me at thehistoryofamericanfood@gmail.com. A few words to review this podcast really do make a difference and help me make sure I'm heading in an interesting direction. Music for this podcast is Fingerlympics by Dr. Turtle. A link to the show notes is also in the show's Twitter and Insta bio @THOA Food and in the show description.